around the world, we're excited. I think there's a lot of people. Yeah, there's people just pouring in here because everyone's excited to hear from the man. I'm really excited to introduce our second masterclass, masterclass number 2. We had Joel Smith a couple of weeks ago, and there's a bit of a flow to this because Joel Smith's masterclass was around the warm up, and now we're moving. We're looking. We thought of it as a race. Come in for your warm up, get into your starts, then you go kind of acceleration and mid range and top speed. And there's nobody better to come in and talk about getting started out of the blocks than our man, my friend, and one of the very best in the world at it, Coach Dennis Mitchell. Um, Dennis and I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of years ago when he reached out, interested in our kit. We've gotten to know each other quite well, been on the track with the team, and I can tell you, not only is he a master coach, but he's a wonderful guy, wonderful person, and really excited and honored to have him. As those of you in early heard, this is heavy season, nationals coming up, big stress. So it's fantastic, Dennis. You took a moment to spend a little time here with the audience that's really keen to hear some of the things you have to say.
Hey, no problem, Joe. Anything for you.
Such a sweetheart. He just knows there's a fishing trip, hopefully at the end of the year together.
There better be a fishing trip in line.
So like to get this thing started from the start side, one of the things that resonated in today's workshop, each master class kind of gets a little different format. Last week or 2 weeks ago with Joel Smith, we had a presentation in slide format. Joel went through it. With Dennis, it's going to be a little more interactive. We're going to talk through some of the scenarios and let him sort of guide the conversation and share with us his knowledge specifically around the start. And why I had asked Dennis to come in is when I was there with them several times on the track is he talked a lot about the start and one of the fortes of Star Athletics. For those who don't know, probably you do. Dennis is the owner and founder of Star Athletics, the fastest team on earth, the Nike Elite Sprint team down there in Florida. And he said one of the fortes that Star is really well known for is starts. And it was an interesting area because coming through high school and college, as we spoke about, Dennis, it's not always an area people focus on. It ends up being something they pick up a little later. And so I thought there could be nothing better than to have you come in and speak a little bit about not just the start from physicality. There's a lot more to a start than saying we use sleds. And one thing I learned with you on the track was the physicality, the intellectual aspect, and the emotional side to having a good start. Because in a 10-second or 20-second race, you spend a whole year doing all that training, and that first step, if it doesn't work, it could all be gone. And that psychology around that's incredible, I think. And I think maybe sharing some of the experience on that with the audience is going to be great. So Dennis, what I'd like to do with you, as we talked about, is I'm kind of going to throw some questions around the start and let you just walk through and share your knowledge around it with that aspect, if that's okay.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. Now, there's one other area we're going to talk about. I'll share that in a little bit. What I think is really your genius and the coolest things I've ever heard about is airtime management. We're going to save that at the end. So if you drop off, you're going to miss something important. So if you want that dessert, you better stay. So let's just jump into some of the first questions here. Just overall, what's really important in a solid block start? And again, talking about that physicality, mentality, emotionality. A lot of people here, there are athletes here, there are coaches here, there are trainers here. If you're going into a coaching session and it's got starts in it, what's the mindset of the coach? What does the athlete want to prepare that session to be like? Because like I said, I watched the way you did that, and there's a lot more than just having them get in the blocks and yelling go. How do you set that up? You get us started on the start.
Well, I mean, this is a very, very loaded question for me, Joe, because the start is something that I really spent a lot of time on.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying time in terms of practice time. This start thing starts all the way in the beginning of our training, in the beginning of our season, right? What I do is, I have my own philosophy in terms of how to teach the start. The very first thing that has to be approached is the physicality of a start, right? In order for an athlete to hit the angles that are necessary to have a good functional accelerated start, they have to first be physically able to perform the task. And that's one of the major things that we as coaches forget about, teaching a start, is that how physical a start actually is to be able to achieve, angle wise. So from the beginning of our training, both in the weight room and the things that we do on the track, I am, behind the scenes, coaching the physicality of a start, meaning some of the things that we're doing in the weight room, some of the angles that we have to achieve in a squat or a leg curl or a leg extension or a hack squat. Those things are all centered around trying to build the power necessary, the physicality necessary to achieve that start once we get into them in the early spring. And I always felt like it was my job, or it was my fault if I've been training an athlete for 3 or 4 or 5 months, and physically they can't perform the task that I want them to perform in the spring when it comes to being able to present the proper angle coming out of a pair of starting blocks. So the physicality is the very first thing that has to be thought of as a coach. It's a very important component to being able to achieve, the proper angles that an athlete needs to have in terms of coming out of the blocks.
Well, can I just add on that? And like you said, I know
Yeah.
when you mentioned, I'm not surprised you started talking about angles right away, because angles is
Yeah.
is kind of nonstop conversation on the track, as I've seen with you and the team.
Right.
So the physicality of the start, I think that's a fantastic place for us to start. Let's go into the physicality, because I think a lot of people think, well, okay, explosive leg power of some degree, but there's a lot more. What are some of the physicality components that you kind of put like sort of your 1, 2, 3? These things need to be in place. These are the things we need to develop. And can we talk from the context of this, Dennis? Because I know we spoke about it as well. Considering that there's probably a lot of high school and college coach athlete people here, as you said, and you and I know, when you get to the pros, you see the results of the high school and college system, right? What's there and maybe what's not there. So talking about, even as a pro coach, thinking, I'd love to see a lot more of this as these people come through.
Well, the way that I have evolved in teaching a block start is, and you guys got to kind of bear with me here because I look at the start a different way. The first initial push away from the blocks, the first, I guess what we're teaching our athletes is the first 15 to 30 meters is your drive. When I look at the drive phase, I don't look at it as a power component. And most coaches think about the start, the first, drive phase of the start as a power component. Although there is a high level of power that is needed to have a good start, that's not actually our focus. Like I said, in the beginning of our training, I'm trying to build the power necessary for the athletes to come out of the blocks. So when we get to a block session, our first block session, if I've done my job correctly, then I'm not worried about the power because I know it's already there. Right now, bear with me here. When an athlete comes out of the blocks, let me see if I can get this right. When an athlete comes out of the blocks, you have your vertical and your horizontal movements, correct? Um, Now, when an athlete comes out of the blocks, the lower they come out, right, the more power they're naturally going to create because of gravity that's pushing them down to the ground, right? So when an athlete is lower, there's going to be automatically more load on the legs, right? If an athlete is higher, right, which is an athlete that is not as powerful, they're going to shoot up out of the blocks. They're going to load the quad and they're going to shoot up out of the blocks. Now, all of a sudden, you don't have the same power that's needed. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when I
Angles.
blocks and I tell the athletes the angle is what's most important to create that power, right? So we don't try to tell the athletes power away from the blocks, power away from the blocks, power away from the blocks. We tell them test the angles. What my thing is as a coach is I tell my athletes to shoot low. Shoot as low as you possibly can, and that is naturally going to put you in a powerful state. Now, once you achieve that powerful state, the only thing that the athlete needs to concentrate on, now we're moving more into the mentality of the block, is the athlete needs to understand when they hit that proper angle, the only thing they need to think about is running away from the block, not powering away from the block.
Can you just so people understand what that actually means?
Well, I mean, it's hard to sit here and explain it,
I
but to
know.
show somebody, it's a lot better. But it's all about the mathematics of running, right? The lower that you are to the ground, the more force you're gonna have to put, or the more load that you put on the muscle to hold the body up. The
Yeah.
higher you are, the less load you need to have in order to put your foot on the ground. And this
And
is only
so,
for a block start now, not for up and running.
yeah, but that powering away, running away from the block versus powering away. When you mention that to an athlete, do they say, "Oh, I get that," or is there some tweaking that needs to be understood to be able to achieve that?
They never do. They never understand because the way that I approach it is slightly different than the way that they've been developed.
Right.
Everybody's been developed to understand I need to power away from the starting blocks. But, in the way that I teach it, I want the athlete to only be focused in on running away from the block so that we can create faster acceleration away from the block, right? So
Yeah.
I've understood that the lower an athlete can achieve, it's going to be based upon how much power they have in their legs from the beginning. The lower they are out of the blocks, the more load they're going to put on their legs to hold their body up. Right now, what's going to happen as a result of that is the athletes are always going to say, Coach, it feels like, I'm stumbling, or it feels like I'm going to fall.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a whole nother element of the block, which is called the emotional state. Right. When an athlete shoots low, right, they're automatically going to feel like they're falling forward.
Yeah.
Right. So that first initial push off the block, right, when they're pushing off that block, they're automatically going to feel like they're off balance. Right. And when you shoot low, you have to cycle under faster. You have to rotate under faster in order to hold your balance. Right. So that initial push, when you push low, you have to meet it with speed. That's why we teach
Have to
running
beat
away from
him.
the block.
Right, right. Running away means you got to get up front. You've got to get away from the block quick, or either you're gonna stand
Or
up
you're going to
early or
fall.
fall. Yeah.
There you go.
Now,
So
go ahead.
when we're developing a block start, we develop the power aspect before we even get to the blocks. Right. So therefore I know that the athlete is strong enough to hold their body up at a lower angle. Right.
Right.
We take care of that in the weight room, we take care of that in our training with sled pulls and stuff like that. So when we get to the actual training of a pair of an athlete trying to come out of the blocks, the only thing that we're focused on in the early spring is the mentality and the emotional state. But honestly, that's the hardest part to teach in the blocks because mentally an athlete doesn't understand that the lower I am, I automatically am loading my muscles so I don't have to power away from the block. That kind of confusion messes them up in the first beginning stages of the block start. When they start to get it, then they start to say, okay, coach, they can tell you whether they were low or whether they were high because they didn't feel the load on the muscles as they were going down the track. Right now the emotional part of it is when you get lower, you have to meet it with speed.
Yeah.
You have to be cycling fast underneath, or you're going to lose your balance. Right now, the emotional part of that is the athlete is going to want to catch themselves from falling. So they're going to want to have a longer stride, right, which puts them into a power stride, right? They're going to go into a longer stride, and then that they're going to create what's called braking, meaning when your foot hits the ground, it hits the ground going forward, as opposed to either neutral going down or
Yeah.
pulling the angle back, which is the neutrality and the pulling back are the things that you eventually want to achieve, right? But in the beginning, they're probably going to create a lot of braking because they're going to want to catch themselves from falling because they don't conceptually understand how much rotation they need to generate in order to control that falling so that they can accelerate down the track.
And so, and I remember with this exactly, and I think maybe you remember one day we were there at the track and you had them working on that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Kyrie that actually fell. You
Yeah,
remember? And it was that trust. You were getting them. They said, I don't want you to think about starting or anything. I just want you to get that body low and cycle. But you could see a lot of the others, there was that hesitancy on that ability, because after he went straight out, he didn't think at all. He listened to every instruction you gave him, and he just boom. He
right.
actually found that point.
And that's a prime example of the athlete going for the angle, but they didn't meet it with speed.
Right. But he
They didn't
learned,
expect
he
that.
went over the limit, right? Like, so I
Yeah,
remember he stood up and he was like, oh, okay, now I know what's too far. That there's a trust issue there. Is there not also, like, because the athlete, you're dealing with emotionality being, they're scared of place planting
they're scared.
into a hard
They're
track.
scared of falling. Right.
And
And it
so,
takes a while to create that balance to where, you know, excuse me, when you meet that angle with speed, right?
yeah,
First of all, when
yeah,
you get it, you love it, right?
yeah.
But it's a process to learn it, and some athletes have a faster learning curve than others, but eventually they all get it.
And you talked about that. It's a process to learn. Is a start something somebody's got a bad start. I'm calling Dennis Mitchell. I got to clean up my start. Yeah, come on in. We'll do a session. All good. Is it like a shooting drill in basketball, or is this something that takes, of course, it's always individual, right? Some athletes, it could be a whole career. They never really nail it. Others get it quick, but is there a general process for you? Like if somebody was working on that, or you identified an athlete who came to your program and said, yeah, we're gonna take some time to develop this.
Well, first of all, I never approach an athlete or a coach when I have to work with them. I never say someone has a bad start or
Yeah,
someone can't start. I say you have bad angles,
yeah,
right? Or you have poor strength. So there's a reason why you don't why you have a bad start or a poor start, right? And then once you recognize those things, then we can fix those things, and now all of a sudden you're a great starter. For instance, when I picked up Justin Gatlin in 2012, all the way his whole career, right, for 12 years, people said Justin Starr has the worst start in the field. He's got the worst start in the world, basically. And I got with them, and the first indoor season we worked together, he was world indoor champ. So it's not it's not an innate thing that certain people are born to have a fast start and some people are born to have a great start. Some people have, great mechanics, or some people have great turnover, that will cause them to have, good starts. But it's not to say that someone who doesn't have those things intrinsically can't have those things developed inside of them.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a really important point, just in general, because when you present a problem as everything, it's hard to know where to even start, right? It's just
Right.
I'm bad. That means a bad start. Then it's never going to get better. But if you turn around and give an eye, like you said, we've got to work on some strength so you're able to get in that start. Physicality. Am I correct in saying it's important to identify early with an athlete, and anybody who's listening is with those components, understand where your athlete might have, whether it's physicality, mentality, or emotionality, where they're weak in the start. Which one of those components or multiple components can you start working on quickly? Is that the way you're saying to approach it? Break it down like
Yes,
everything
and
else.
but Joe, I'd say 9 times out of 10, you're going to start with the physicality of the
Yeah.
start, right? Because immediately you want to start testing to see what angles these athletes can achieve or your athlete can achieve.
Right.
And if it's not so good, you're going to see them, what I call jumping high out of the blocks all the time, because what they do, they don't want to push forward. They're going to want to push up. They're going to want to load that quad and push themselves up. So you always want to start with what physical specimen am I working with, right? And then you say, okay, we're in midseason, and I've identified this athlete is very weak, and we don't have time to work on strength, right? We got to meet in a week, right? So what you do is you just deal with whatever physicality you have in that athlete at that time, right? And then you move into the mentality and the emotional part. So you got to find that sweet spot that that athlete can shoot and be able to physically handle, right? And then you move immediately to the other components. If you can understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Again, I'm thinking about that level of knowledge you've got in the audience and trying to get them understanding how to take this forward. Because I would imagine if I'm a coach listening, I'm now thinking, okay, because you know how it is when you're a coach, you always have an issue in your mind pertaining to an athlete. This athlete's working on this. This is what we're working on there. It's not about, hey, I've got a program and everyone's trying to get stronger. Maybe at the beginning of the year, that's the conditioning mindset. So for those sitting there wondering, all right, well, I think it's a physicality issue. I think it's a mentality or emotionality. I kind of want to go back a little bit and just sort of talk
Hmm.
and not assume that the audience would know. You mentioned sleds, but let's just go to physicality. You said this is something we start right at the beginning of the year. So,
Hmm.
and I think that's really important because I imagine, like a lot of coaches, it doesn't matter what sport, they wait for competitive aspects of the game to the competitive season. Like, like if I use team sports, the kickoff, they might start working the kickoff in say football or rugby just before the season because now you're about to go into a game. But
Hmm.
you don't want to wait until they get in season, then you start working on your starts. As you mentioned, this starts right back at the beginning. It's a critical part of the physicality, what we do. And so, what are some of the key physical aspects that you make sure this team, these athletes have in place early? And might be as simple as, yeah, we do a lot of sweat work or, a 2x squat. But what are some of the things you look for? And the other area would be even that physicality, shoulder flexibility, strength, the confidence and ability to be in that static position, where you carry that force between the arms and the legs and being in that spring. What are some of the areas you find really important, physical wise, to get done early in the season, or they're just not going to be able to hit those angles?
Well, lower body is the key, right? And I'm sure every coach in here knows that in track and field, we live at a 90-degree angle,
Yeah.
with our lower leg. Um, so when we're in the weight room, and you've been in there, I do some unconventional things. I work on, the load of the muscle. I don't necessarily focus in on, uh, how much weight an athlete can lift, right? That's an easy way of working your way through a weight room, just seeing how heavy you can lift certain weights. What I concentrate on is first and foremost is technique. Um, because I feel as though if you have the proper technique, then you don't need to put 1,000 pounds on somebody's back to see or to load the muscle properly. And when we squat, we only squat, at 90 degrees. We don't do deep squats because anything less than 90 degrees doesn't exist in track and field, in sprinting.
Yeah.
So you're working an angle. I mean, if you can lift, put your butt on the floor and lift 1,000 pounds, straight up the ground, you're not even going to use those first few angles, so it's just wasted movement, right? So we
Mm.
stay around the 90-degree angle, with our squats, and we also do a lot of single leg stuff. The reason why we do that is because each leg always works independently in track and field.
Yeah.
I say track. Um, so you got to make sure that unilaterally each leg can support the amount of force that you're creating when you're actually coming out of the blocks or you're running. And also, it helps you as a coach be able to identify those imbalances early in the season, from the athletes that you're coaching. You can recognize those things very quickly when you start isolating the legs, because everybody's always got a good leg and a bad leg. So you want to make sure that they're as even as they possibly can. But some athletes, you know, believe it or not, are, super right leg dominant or super left leg dominant, and the other leg is not, holding the load that it needs to. And you can also, with that kind of situation, identify, injuries later in the season if that ratio is too big. So we do a lot of one leg stuff to identify several different things in an athlete. But the number one thing is to be able to make sure that we're creating enough power in both legs to be able to support the body later on in the season, with the force that they're creating. Moving
And
towards the track, we do a lot of lower leg sled pulls.
yeah,
And we work sled pulls by creating a low angle once again. And I want my athletes, if, everybody here has a different spot on the track where they say their athletes are supposed to drive. Some coaches are going to say 18 meters, some going to say 30, some going to say 25. But what I do is I throw all of that out of the window, right? And we drive our sleds with a low angle, with a dry phase type angle, um, for 50, 60 meters, right? We go
yeah, I've
far
seen it.
beyond that. We go far beyond that, right? The reason being is because when you take the sled away and you reel it back, whatever that distance is that you're saying you want to have your athletes drive to, okay, they're going to be able to do it because you've been training it in them, at a longer distance for weeks or months,
Yeah,
right? Um, I particularly don't do that. The reason why I do it, is because of strategy. Joe, when you've talked to me a lot, I'm a big strategy type guy,
yeah,
right? So I know that if I have, one of my girls that has a big race today, and they're racing one of the stronger girls in the field, and it's going to be a tough race, and the race is going to be decided in the first 40 meters, right? I want to be able to have a strategy to where I say, look, Melissa, on this particular race, and we did that actually this year, in the 200, in the Grand Slam, when she beat Gabby Thomas for the first time. I said, look, you know, I know that your dry phase is 22 to 25 meters, but I'm going to need 30 out of you today, right? I need you to take it to 30, right? Now, in my strategy, I have to be sure that she can execute that
yeah,
strategy.
yeah. It's
You
not
understand
just
what I'm
a
saying?
wish.
It's not just a wish. It's not just oh, I just woke up today and now we have to do something that we haven't practiced,
Yeah,
right? Or that we haven't applied in practice, right?
yeah,
So for me, it's a strategic thing to where I
yeah,
know anywhere in that period of them driving, I can say, I want you to drive for 20 meters and come out and start running, or I need 30 today,
yeah,
and with Melissa, at that Grand Slam, the day before, I told her, I said, look, we're gonna have to, and normally in a 200, our accelerated pattern out of the blocks is 40 meters. I said, I need 50 today. I need you to take this thing to 50, right? And she executed it perfectly. And
we saw.
Gabby just couldn't respond. She couldn't respond to it,
Yeah. So
because of
go ahead.
strategy. Go ahead, I'm,
Well,
I'm
now,
done.
yeah, no, Dennis, I think this is really good. And I think for coaches that are listening, this is why you're a master at this, is because I think often, and certainly in the sprints, is you think about run your best race. I'll prepare you for sort of a perfect 100. And you think about this is what should be achieved in a start. This is where you should be at 30. This is where you should be at 50, 70, 100. And that's the same all year at every race. But what they have to realize, like every competition, is you have to also race against your opponents. You have to know what they're going to
Yes.
do. You have to be ready for that. And if you don't have the physicality, mentality, and emotionality developed in training, even in something like a 60 or 100 or a 40-meter dash, even though you're running by yourself at the combine and you're noticing everybody's coming out fast, I got to come out fast. Oh, but I can't come out fast. well, you might be in trouble. And you need to understand the strategy of your race and have enough training variability that you can adjust to the
That you can
situation.
adjust to it. Exactly.
I think
You
that's
know,
incredible.
and the final thing that we do is we also push sleds.
I was
You
going to
know,
ask what,
because
talk about push and pull.
well, we push the sleds so that we can teach the athletes how to strike the ground properly, right? Because when you push the sled is actually in front of you, so you cannot overstride,
Yeah,
right? And it forces you to stay at a lower angle,
yeah,
right? So we're only doing lower body frequency work,
yeah,
right? And the athletes start to understand that how I strike the ground is what helps me create my propulsion, not the push, but how I strike the ground helps with my propulsion. And pushing the sled actually, puts the athlete in the proper angle to where you as a coach can literally walk beside or run beside, jog beside that athlete and talk them through how to do it.
I just
So
made a note
again,
here
we're
on that. Um, so again, because as you know, for a lot of people, sleds just become another heavy thing to do. They turn it into a weight training exercise, right? And people get
Mhm.
excited about driving that sled. What you're saying is, okay, maybe with a young athlete, you kind of need to get some of that physicality in their body and just get them used to that push and that strength. But as you move up and get faster, what that foot is doing is more important than what that sled is doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's all designed around running from the blocks, running in low angles, trying not to physically create power, but use your angles to create power. And it
Yeah.
helps the athlete also to be able to understand that, I have a sled here that weighs 30 pounds or whatever. And then I have a 45-pound weight on top of that. And, somehow by me striking the ground, in a millisecond, I got to get this sled moving. It helps them to be able to understand how to propel that sled down the track without spending a lot of ground contact time,
Yeah.
right? And we're teaching frequency to move that sled down the track. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, very much. And like I get it, it's never moving away from what the important part of training is. And I think it's easy, and certainly some days an athlete's tired and they just get out there, and I'm sure some days they just feel like, I don't know what, but I'm just pushing this sled today. But on, but in general, they have to know why they're pushing that sled and use that in the technique because that's where their speed is going to come from. Because
Yeah.
there
Yeah,
are a lot of people that can push a heavy sled that are not fast.
exactly.
Yeah,
And with me, I try to bring every tool, and this, and that's why I contacted you, is
yeah.
because I try to use every tool that comes into my training environment as a learning opportunity for my athletes. If they can't learn from it, then why are we doing it?
Well, can I say something that you said to me? And I was wondering when this would come up in the conversation. I wanted it to happen organically. And you said something to me on the track a couple of years ago, which I found really interesting. You said, Joe, of course, you've got some of arguably the fastest people on the earth. And some of them are the fastest people in history and going to be. And you said, all my people are fast. I'm not here to make them faster. I'm here to teach them why they're fast. And if I can
Hmm.
teach them why they're fast and connect to that on a given day, they're going to do something special. And I
Yeah,
remember that.
I actually said they become a weapon.
Yes. Okay. So now explain that. If I could teach them why they're fast, because again, I think a lot of sprint coaching in general is always, it's very, I did my level one, I do the drills. If I do the things I was told to do in coaching, we'll get a result. And that is
Hmm.
true at the bottom end of the spectrum. It's 100% true with young athletes and kids, you get improvement. But as improvement gets tougher and the other people around you are also getting faster and better, you have to get much better at that process. And now it becomes mastery. So, can you just expand on this? I got to teach them why they're fast. Everything has to be learning because I think that should be applied from kids all the way up.
Yeah, it definitely should be. Um, at my level, we're at such fine tuning of, what we're applying technically, to these guys. And like I said, the tools that I bring into my training are critical to me being able to teach a specific mechanic, right? So when I'm out there coaching, I know that, like, we have themes, and the theme of this year was ground contact time. So we
Interesting.
did everything in our training, right? And we tracked all of our athletes' ground contact time in our sprint things. The year that you came was a power year. We, focused in on, developing power in that particular year. Um, so when I'm coaching, I really have to, be cautious of the things that I bring in when it comes to the tools that I use, because they have to be specifically directed to something that I'm teaching. At this level, and this is just my opinion on how I approach my day-to-day operation, is that, I'm not going to bring anything into our training that my athletes don't understand and that they can't use as a tool. We're just not, into the holistic stuff, that you just do a lot of things and hopefully, we'll weed the bunch out
Something
and some of them
sticks.
will rise and something sticks. I'm not in that business, right?
Yeah.
The business that I'm in is, like I said before, and you just said that all of my athletes are fast, right? My job is to be able to teach them the whys, right? And if I can teach them the whys, then I can get specific in the things that I can teach them. And then once I get there, then that athlete becomes a weapon and they can do anything or run as fast as their heart's desire. So that's kind of how we approach things. And that's why in the blocks, we try to always coach every element of that block start. You cannot coach uh, physicality only,
Yeah.
because the more physical they get, the better that they get at their angles, they're they're mentally they're going to be challenged, right? And you better be ready as a coach to be able to get them to understand why are they mentally challenged at this particular point in their block start. And then when that block start gets good, now you're going to start the emotional part. We talked about earlier about these athletes feeling that feeling of falling coming out of the
Mm.
blocks. Well, that's the pure emotional state, right? Because the athletes are always, and your body always wants to protect itself, right? It doesn't want to fall. They don't want to be embarrassed at the
Of
track.
course not.
They don't want to get a track burn. They don't want these things. So they're always subconsciously trying to protect themselves, right?
Yeah.
But what you have to do as a coach, you got to understand that that environment, right, is there. It's a real thing, right? So you have to take the opportunity as a coach to say, I'm going to coach this too. I'm going to coach the emotional state. I'm
Yeah.
going to coach the emotional part of coming out of the blocks because I know it exists, right?
Yeah.
And then once
Well,
you
you've
can
done
bring
it
all of
also.
those into a training environment, Joe, once you can bring all of those in a training environment, now all of a sudden, the last and final component is the challenge of the start. It's trying to bring all of those things together. We do starts on Tuesday and Thursday. Every single Tuesday and Thursday, we're trying to bring all of those together. We're trying to
Mm.
challenge ourselves to bring all of those together. I'm challenging the athlete to bring it all together. The athlete is challenging themselves to bring it all together. And sometimes, we do group starts. We're a heavy group start kind of team. But I'll just come out one day and just say, hey, we're going to do a start to 30 and the best technique wins. Not the first person, but the best technique,
Mm.
right? So you create these kind of challenges, in your training environment that the athletes can connect to because they have a full understanding of the physicality, the mentality,
Yeah.
and the emotional part that exists in coming out of a starting blocks.
And I've seen it. I've been there with you during those sessions and seen that. We're going to do it to 10. We're going to do it to 30. We're going to 50. You mix the guys and girls together. Guys got to be 2 steps out at this. It's like all those constant challenges, right? And then for those watching, it's what I loved and why we're here having this conversation and why I learned so much is then on the walk back, it's all that discussion about why that worked, why didn't it work. It's not just a kind of a blur, walk back, try it again. It's not just throwing up effort. There's a lot of intense thinking, emotion, figuring out, learning, and you can see that happening both in your feedback and with them. And yeah, those sessions are pretty awesome, and they do seem to get it because as soon as they turn around and finish, they come right over to you and they either want to see their video. They're like, "Coach, did I do that? Did I do that?" And you realize they were conscious. Or they were conscious it didn't work either.
Yeah,
And I
or they'll
think,
come to me and they'll tell me what they did wrong.
yeah,
You
and
know,
I
and they just want confirmation on the video that, oh yeah, I see it, I see what I did
I
wrong,
see it.
and then
I
they'll
see it.
automatically go back to the line and try to fix it.
Yeah,
But it's because you created that challenging environment and you've addressed all of those things coming up to, those start sessions. So it's like almost like a feeding frenzy of trying to do it right. And once you get there, you're in a good spot.
yeah, and I think that exposure to that high level pressure on a regular basis is really important. And
Yeah.
would it be so at a high school and college level, do you think? Like, this is interesting. It comes to mentality because I know this. A funny story here. When I was at Malaysia Sports Council, we had a young athlete at Australia, what was it, Sydney 2000, and he stood right beside, he went to his first heat. He was about a 10-2 sprinter, national sprinter here, first time at the Olympics, and sitting right next to him is Maurice Green in his heat. Okay. So, and he had about 10 coaches tell him what to do before the start. Everything was a mess. They hadn't really worked it. He ran his worst time ever. And all they were really hoping was he was going to hit a national record. We were hoping for a good
Mhm.
time. But I remember coming back and thinking there was no strategy in place. Nobody would think an Olympic athlete at that level would have been left of his own. There were so many things wrong with that scenario. And I don't think that's often the same, so different today, that people aren't prepared to be there on the blocks at a major race or competition if it hasn't happened in training.
Right. And that's exactly why we do high pressurized starts because, I'm trying to explain this in very simple terms so,
Sure.
people can get kind of where my mentality is with this. But the start is a very complex movement.
Yeah.
There's a lot of components involved in having a good accelerated start, right? And if you're not putting these athletes in a pressure situation to where they have to process all of these components in a very short period of time, then you're putting them in a situation that is not fair to them because in the moment where they have to get what they want, which is a good time or a medal or a place
Hmm.
that they want that day, and they're not prepared for that particular moment, you could be putting them in an uncomfortable situation.
And ultimately likely a failure. And I think the worst thing with the start is you don't, I talk to athletes that a lot, and you much more, is you don't want them saying, yeah, I hope I get a good start. If I can get a good start, then it'll be all right. And I'm like, well, that, hope that's not supposed to be part of the process.
It's not supposed to be a part of the process.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't have 100%, success rate,
of course.
doing it my way. Because, and I've told you this, when you send those athletes out there, that's a non-coachable moment. That's a moment that I cannot help them with, and athletes are going to make mistakes, right? But the thing that I have at my advantage is by the time that athlete gets back to me, he's going to already or she's going to already tell me what they did wrong,
Yeah.
right? So we use a mistake as a learning opportunity, right? And that's because we're both aware of that mistake, and then we know how to go back to practice and fix it. It's not
Right.
that, oh my God, you had a bad start, and we got to go back to the drawing board and get stronger, or all of these things that you say to an athlete that makes them feel okay that they didn't have a good start that day. Um,
Yeah,
but
like
with
hard
us,
luck
it's a
or
it's a
bad luck.
higher level conversation. Yeah, with
Yeah.
us, it's a higher level conversation. we really get into the weeds when it comes to why we didn't do what we did today out of a pair of start blocks.
There's a question in there, and it might be a bit of a straightforward question, Dennis, just because I said, let's talk to the audience here. What percentage, and I knew this would kind of come up. So when you're looking at sleds, what percentage of loading preseason or in season do you use as a progression? And, this is a really sort of straightforward. How much load do I put on that sled? Maybe how do I progress it? Is it the same all year? Just a little bit of your thoughts on how you load up that sled, knowing, and I think we go back to what you're saying is the determinant is how they're using that foot more than what's on the sled, I'm sure.
And that's exactly right, Joe.
Yeah.
I don't play with loads on the sled. When I pull a sled out, I am looking for teaching a movement.
Yeah.
I am not teaching at trying to build power because of I got 100 pounds behind me or something like that. That's
Yeah.
not my objective. My objective is I need a minimal amount of weight, right? So that I can teach a specific angle,
Yeah.
right? So that the athletes can perform this particular angle and work technique
Yeah.
with this exercise. So loading is not the my primary objective, right? What the athletes do technically and how much load I can put on them to be able to perform that technique. So it could be a lightweight,
It could just be
it
the
could be a
sled.
lightweight. It could be just a sled if they're loading the muscle properly, if they're presenting the right angle, right? And then as the athletes get a little bit stronger, then you work up the load as long as they're practicing the good technique that you're trying to teach them from working that sled. So again, if I can't bring a device or anything into my training that I don't have a purpose for in terms of teaching a specific mechanic, it's not coming into training.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm only going to introduce things to them
Like,
because I'm trying to get a specific mechanic from that device.
and
So loading and unloading, and how like we use 1080s, and on the 1080s you can dial up 25 meters at 4 kilos, and then have it dialed down to 2 kilos, and then go. We don't mess with none of that, right? Because I'm working. If I'm using that machine, I'm going to pull it out, and today is a certain mechanic that we're working. We're
yeah.
either working a running mechanic or a start mechanic, and in order to do that, I don't have to play with the loads. So loading for me is only enough to where I can put an athlete in a position to where they can have enough resistance to be able to perform the mechanic that I'm teaching that day.
That's the answer. Enough resistance for the outcome we're focusing on. And the resistance isn't the outcome.
No, the
Yeah.
mechanic is the outcome.
Yeah. And so for those of you for that question, Rob, and for the rest of you wondering how much do I load? Because you do see these conversations. Oh, we use 30 pounds or 50. People get excited about those numbers and gym numbers. And and with wearable resistance, we talk about this all the time. I mean, the best coaches in the world across sport ask me always how much load. And I said, well, look, follow our guidelines for a reason, because I want you to start light, stay attached to technique, and then you see how the loading affects technique. You will see when the load is no longer doing what you want it to do. It's now doing something else. It might be heavy, it might be strength, but you're not working skill anymore. These are the things we work through, and we tell people with wearable resistance, their guideline is your speed and your technique, not the percentage of weight on the bar mentality. Because people always ask us, like, should I use 5 pounds or 10 pounds or this? I said, follow our guidelines. And you remember with Justin, and you remember when I think it was the first trial, and I had mentioned just use 200 grams, get them started. They're going to feel things different. And I think it was him that loaded up a ton of weight. And then he came back and he said, no, man, this stuff is a lot heavier than you think.
Take it off.
And you're like, yeah, take it off. He said, I told you, man, Joe said start light. And that's because he immediately felt wait a minute, I want to sprint here. I'm not trying to run down the track with heavy weight for, a mountain. I'm not a mountain goat. I'm a cheetah. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think you're saying is use the sled or whatever tool on the track with that mentality. Know why you're using it, focus on that teak, and let the load be a reflection of that. And if you're doing something and it's like, yeah, my technique's good and the load is light, add more.
Add more, right?
Yeah.
And you'll know when that time comes. And the
Yeah.
reason why, when I get on these type of seminars and I get those same questions, but I can't tell you how, strong your athletes are. So what I'm doing in my training, is not something that you could possibly be doing in your training. Everybody has to kind of tailor, their training to fit the technique that you're trying to achieve for that particular day. That's the most important thing is, concentrate on what you're trying to teach as opposed to, how much load of something that you're putting on.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that in a sport we call that individualization, which you never want to. You're here, a master coach, training some of the best people in the world, Olympic champion and world champion yourself. You've done all that, but it doesn't mean people should say Dennis Mitchell did that, so we're doing that. Because you still have to deal with the physicality, mentality, emotionality of that person in front of you. You
Right.
could take these guidelines and tips and the overreaching idea, but you have to spend time understanding the person you're working with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
both individually and as a group.
And
You have to
something,
get an understanding of
yeah, and something others might not know about you. I didn't know. It was one of those times we were together there on the track, and you mentioned your background was actually special education. And so when
that.
you
You're
talk,
right.
yeah, and you said you come from a family of special educators. So it's when I watched you work, I saw that educator always at play. And I think for people to understand, if you don't come from an education background, like you said, turn everything into a learning experience because they're the one that's going to go out and race. And I just want to finish on this last part in terms of the block start because I thought it was also a really important point, the non-coachable moment. If you don't prepare them for the race and that moment when you're like, you've done it all, you've talked to them, you said good luck, they walk away from you, whether it's at the Grand Slam, the Olympics, the NCAAs, or their high school meet, but you are no longer their coach. You're just another person watching and hoping they're going to put it all together. At that moment, they have to take everything away and use it. And if it hasn't been an educational experience for them to be able to do that, they're probably not going to succeed.
Yeah,
You're
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And and success comes in many different forms, Joe. We're all, not going to win every race,
yeah,
right? But if you put the athlete into a learning environment and your coaching becomes more of an educational component, um, then when the athletes finish their races, you can have that conversation.
yeah,
You can have that conversation of, okay, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? How can we get better? What do we need to focus on more in practice? It becomes a conversation as opposed to the coach saying all of those things to the athlete. And then
yeah,
the athlete just goes and on Monday they're a robot again.
yeah. Yeah,
You
that
know
that
what I'm
that one-way
saying?
conversation. You did this, you did this, you did this, and they're kind of nodding their
Right.
head.
Right. My biggest flaw as a coach that I say is a flaw in terms of myself and my development as a coach is I never, want an athlete to come back to me and I look them in the face and I say, I told you so. Right? I don't want to have to say that to an athlete, right? Because in a non-coachable moment, I can't tell them anything.
Yeah,
So there's no such thing as I told you so. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
You're just
yeah,
you're just hoping for a good race. And if you have to wait until that athlete comes back to you to say I told you so, well, when did you tell them? That education should be on board. It should be in the brain.
yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So me, if I have to tell an athlete that, then we did something wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, even with young kids. Something else, I go back, somebody asked a question about why did you have a longer drive phase when racing Gabby with Melissa? But I think, you know, when you think about that question, think of the strategy you gave her. I need an extra 5 meters on, 10 meters on that drive phase. You didn't tell her turn over, first step, back up, stay tall, all those technical things that were done. It was just, I need 5 more, 10 meters more from you. If
Is
you're
that a
at the
question?
point, well, I'll give you the question here, but if you're overcoaching just before a race, it probably means something wasn't done that should have been done earlier.
There you go. There you go.
And and so
You
you
know,
give them something simple to work on. Here's your strategy. Drag out that acceleration for an extra 5 meters. If you can do that, I think we're going to catch him.
right.
And so the
So,
question was, why did you do that? What was the advantage over Gabby? I think that's just more an interesting question. Specifically, why did you want Melissa to have a longer drive phase when racing against Gabby? What benefit did you get from that? It's interesting.
okay. Okay. That's a fun one. All right.
Yeah.
So we were at the actual track that we were on is the pin relays track. It's a very unusually sized track or measured track. It has very, very big turns and shorter straightaways, right? So in this particular race, and I was raised on pin relays track, so I knew how to run on that track, right? So I knew the centrifugal force would be much less with a wider turns, right?
Yeah.
That Melissa could have a longer drive phase on a bigger turn track, right? So the strategy is that I knew that Gabby has a terrible start, right? So what she was going to do is she was going to come out of the blocks and jump straight up. So now you have a track that has big turns, very little, I'm not going to say very little centrifugal force, but the centrifugal force that she's not
That's
particularly used to that gives her that width, right? She's going to feel almost like she's running straight, right?
hmm.
And I knew she was going to come up early, right? The heaviest part of that centrifugal force was on the other side of the track when we came on from the turn to the straightaway. It's what I call a 2-2. 20 meters into the straightaway, 20 meters down the straightaway. So our goal was to try to get to that 2-2 as fast as we could, right? And try to gap her. So when Gabby came up and started running, you will literally see Melissa just pulling away from her, right? Because we're staying in our drive phase, trying to utilize as much centrifugal force as we can. Because I know when she comes up, it's going to decrease significantly, right?
Yeah.
So I asked her to hold another 10 meters for me so that we could get a little more distance away from her because I knew Gabby was going to be standing up, right? So that gap opened up, right? And I knew Gabby was gonna charge her as soon as we got down the straightaway. Now the other thing about the straightaway is the straightaway is shorter on that track.
Mm.
So Gabby was gonna try to reel Melissa in on the straightaway, but I knew she was gonna run out of space, right?
Strategy.
So that 10 meter that we got on the turn paid us back on the straightaway because she ran out of space to try to reel Melissa in, and we won that race by 3-4 meters.
And
So it's a
interest.
strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. And again, if you haven't put all that into training, then that simple instruction is not going to play out because she's just struggling with my first step on my block or popping up too early or all those other things that won't be able to reel in to allow that to happen.
Exactly. Now,
Yeah.
I'll tell you about that race in our training, right? We pull sleds or 1080s, right? And all we do is we have a drill that we just use to work frequency, right? Where we're just turning for 80 meters, we're just turning over, trying to strike the ground properly to pull the sled. We're not trying to run fast. We're just trying
Yeah.
to almost do very quick high knees,
Yeah.
right? That helps us in two areas. When you're coming off the turn in a 200, right, to connect the turn to the straightaway, it's all about frequency. You got to be able to have high frequency through that particular area. So we're training that in practice, right? And then that frequency coming down that straightaway has to be maintained as far as you possibly can down the straightaway so that you don't open that stride up and decelerate, especially under fatigue.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
see what I'm saying? So
yeah.
all the components that I was telling Melissa to execute in that race, we've had some form of that in our training that I knew she could execute it, in that race with no problem.
Yeah. That's it. And like you said, that's a fun question, but at the end of the day, it's about having the athlete prepared to do those things and
Exactly.
not waiting. Like, imagine if you started working on starts late in the season, because somebody just asked another question, one more on this before we're going to start wrapping up. Just for everybody who's listening, this was supposed to be ending at 9. I kind of thought there might be some interesting things. We're going to try and wrap this up in the next 5 minutes here. And the question was, what do you look for in the physical aspect of an athlete to know when they are ready to start practicing starts? I think you kind of answered that, where we're doing starts all year, but
Yeah, we're training the components of the start very, very early in the season. Within 2 to 3 weeks of them first starting to train, we're in the weight room working those angles. We're,
stop. Just one sec, guys. We might have lost Dennis here for a minute. Okay. Just give me a sec here. Something is just put a message to Dennis here. Rejoin the link. Yeah, give us one sec, you guys. So we'll get to wrap up in a finale on this and airtime management. I wanted to give you a minute on that because I think it's a really important concept that's going to help people understand what you're working on if you're really working on speed. Just give them a sec here. And yeah, we'll bear with me one sec. He's worth waiting for. And if there's any other questions while he comes in, while we're waiting for him, you want to shoot out, go ahead and do that. But Paulo, on that about knowing when to start, like you said, I think something to think of is, because start is such a technical thing, they start working starts, even if the athlete's not fully ready physically to maximize what they're trying to do in the start. He just dropped off, which means he's probably going to drop right back in. He's got my message here. Are there any other questions anybody has at the moment? Just an athlete. Okay, I think he's having an internet issue. Maybe there's a typhoon or some major storm down there in Florida, like there seems to be a lot. Oh, here he is. One sec. Sorry, thanks for waiting, guys. Hey, Dennis.
am I back?
You are back, and yeah, no problem. I told everybody there was a small technical error. You're on. I can see you, and I think we can hear you. You're good. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. There you go.
I can't hear you, Joe.
Oh, you're on. Um, uh, can't hear me. Just so you know, Dennis, can you see me? You're good. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. We can continue. Why am I not? He can't hear me. But go ahead. Here, I'll leave you a question. Airtime management. Oh, wait. Can you hear me now? Can I call them through WhatsApp or will we get an echo? Hey, for the audience, can the audience hear me?
Joe, I'm not hearing anything.
Can the audience hear Joe?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Dennis, how are we gonna do this, Amir? I'll try and put it on WhatsApp. Hold on, guys, hold on. That must sound funny. Dennis,
Joe,
okay,
I
we
can't
can
hear
hear,
anything.
no, and everyone can hear you and everyone can hear me. We can't hear each other. I have no idea why.
Okay, so we'll
So
just stay on the phone.
yeah, let's do this just because everyone in the audience can hear us. So just now, I want to jump to this thing called a few more minutes. Everybody's staying on, so obviously you got their attention. Um, I just want to do a quick summary on the block start. You know, coming in right now for people out there coaching, athletes that are doing it. You know, we went through the physicality, the mentality, emotionality. I think it's important for people to be able to know where they're weak in those areas so they have something to work on. And then the other one is stay very technical all the time. And number three is work the start all year.
Yes.
Work scenarios all year. Would you say that's a good summary?
That's a very, very good summary. And I cannot stress enough that in the beginning of your training, physicality is probably the easiest thing to work on. And that way, when you get to actually utilizing starting blocks, you can use your time to mostly focus on the mental and the emotional part because those two elements are going to be the toughest ones.
Yeah.
They're going to be the toughest ones to kind of get instilled in the athlete, and you're going to need time to work on those things. But you know, if the athlete is not physically capable of performing the task, then you're just going to mess them up mentally and emotionally. So we got to make sure that physicality is there, that you want to, or that you want your athletes to exhibit when they're coming out of the blocks. And, so that when we get to the blocks, the only things that we have to kind of worry about coaching is the mental and emotional part of it.
Everybody asks this question, you know, how much load? People are really interested in sleds or 1080s or whatever it is. The other thing you mentioned was when you, can you hear me on the WhatsApp? Can you hear me on the WhatsApp? You should be good now.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Again, we apologize for the technical side and bearing with us, but the physicality, the amount of load is less important than what you're trying to achieve. And so coaches, it's start light, make sure they know why they're pushing a sled or pulling a sled or using a 1080 or whatever that movement is, or loaded with exogen before you start loading them for the purpose of loading. Angles and technicality.
A little bit about the exogen part.
Yeah. So I wanted to say, so, you know, just for those listening, we've had quite a nice run with Exogen over the last few years. As you always says, we're just getting started, but tell us where you found value because Exogen relates to that thing you said to me, airtime management.
Right. Now, the exogen part came into play with me because, your levers when you're coming out of the blocks exhibit such complex movement and things are happening so fast that the athletes don't know where their levers are. And your levers are your arms, your knee to hip, and your knee to ankle. Those things typically try to get away from athletes when they're coming out of a block. They don't know where they are because things are happening so very fast. So I, started researching the product, and then I had a friend that was over there with Joe, and they introduced me to Lila. And the thing that I loved about it is that you can attach a very, very light load to a person's lever, whether it be a knee to hip or knee to ankle, and immediately that athlete became aware of what that particular lever was load, it helped an athlete be able to actually feel like, let's just say when we're coming out of a crowd of blocks, and an athlete has very high heel cycle coming through the block, or through their run. What happens is when you put that little load on there, the athlete feels that heel coming up. And now they can say, okay, coach, I feel it, I understand what it means now. And now they can go back and start working on keeping that heel load through a particular movement. So it really is just about helping the athlete, on my end. I don't know how you guys look at it, but when I look at it, it's trying to get that athlete to be able to neuromuscularly stay connected through a complex movement. Like Joe was very good at and helping with Tia in the hurdles. So her being able to actually exhibit a hurdle mechanic, but also wear exogen on her body at the same time. I didn't think it was possible with this guy. He came in, but she goes out there and the way he designed it on her is almost like weight training and hurdling at the same time. So now our hurdle volume isn't as high because now we use the exogen to be able to strengthen her movements through a hurdle and not just using the weight room to strengthen the use exogen to actually help her with strengthening her very complex movement as a hurdle rotation. So it's invaluable.
Yeah, just checking you on this, back on that WhatsApp. I think, oh, Dennis, can you hear me?
Call me back, Joe.
Okay. Again, people were apologize for whatever technically is going on. Something weird has happened at the end of this hour, but making sure Dennis can hear me. Yeah, and so again, I think what's important for people to understand is tools. We talked about this throughout the session, is knowing the tools, wearable resistance or 1080 or sleds, is don't just use the tools because you heard somebody else is using. Kind of know what you're working on. Like Exogen is also that, because I get a lot of people coming to me and saying, the first thing they want to know with Exogen, how much load do I get when I buy it? And I already know they don't understand what the tool's built for. Because if you just want load, don't buy Exogen, buy a sled or just a heavy weighted vest. There are cheaper, simpler things that you can use to give you load. But when you go in, and something you said earlier, because we did a lot of individual work, as you know, first step on this one, leg. I remember Kaylin, it was the glute on the right side, the outside leg. So many athletes were left, right. We can go in and start working those things. And I think that's another area that came up today is a lot of coaches think of things like squats and power cleans and movements like that, but everybody does have an imbalance, and that imbalance is probably affecting mechanics and speed. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to change it, but you have to know how it's affecting you. And a tool like Exogen allows you to work areas on a curve, on a start, where those imbalances might really show up.
That's exactly right. Also, but the airtime nature. When an athlete is actually in the air in between, step to step, going from left to right or right to left in a particular stride, they become, and there's some high level 1% of the sport can do it, but most athletes aren't aware again of their levers when they're in the air.
Yeah.
Right. So it has always been a challenging environment for a coach because you kind of see things on slow motion video, or you see things with your naked eye that these athletes are exhibiting in their airtime that you don't know how to fix.
Yeah.
Because the athlete neuromuscularly or just neurologically in general aren't connected to their body when they're in the air.
That proprioception, that feeling. Yeah. And I remember a session specifically, it was starts, we were loading, and I'm going to show a couple of video clips at the end here for people to get some visual on some of this with the guys on the track, some of the stuff Treston sent along. And they were loaded at the front of the shin, and they were working the angle, keeping the foot low, and also feeling of pushing that leg out. And I remember TT and Shikari walking back, and they were talking to each other, and they were saying, could you feel that? Could you feel that push? Could you feel that leg doing that? And they were saying, yeah, I could feel it pushing against the load. And so it gave them a cue, right? It's almost like you had your hand there. It gave them something to feel while they were running so they could connect with the coaching cue that you'd given them to focus on. Right. But it was physically there at high speed in the technical thing they were actually working on. And I remember thinking that's fascinating because that had nothing to do with you, had nothing to do with me. That was the two of them chit-chatting about what they needed to be doing and feeling as they were walking back in between reps. And I thought if they didn't have that thing on the leg at that spot, they would have had no way even to have that conversation. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Oh, Dennis, can you unmute? You're on mute, I think. Can people hear him? I can hear him on that. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. The question. Yeah. The question was for people is on the proprioception, needing to put the load is, load with Exogen, load can be for loading, like strength or weight, or it can also be for proprioception, feeling. And I think, Dennis, you just turned off your video. There you are. So Dennis was talking about that proprioception aspect of Exogen.
I missed you, Joe.
I was just saying you were talking about the proprioceptive aspect of Exogen, and because the limb in the air has very little sensory understanding of itself and connection to the body.
Right. And the way, the athletes are wearing this Exogen, it really helps them be able to understand what their levers are doing while they're in the air in a particular stride, right? And that's an area that me as a coach has never been able to have a conversation with an athlete because they're not as aware of what their body is doing because it's a very, very one complex movement, and two, it happens so very fast.
Yeah.
Right? That the athletes just aren't connected to that movement. So like I was telling you before, Joe, it created a whole nother conversation that you can have with your athletes now, because now they know or feel what their knee to hip is doing. They feel that, they can feel that heel swinging up towards their butt. They can actually feel these things in a particular stride. So it created a whole nother conversation now that I can have with an athlete because now they're connected to those parts of their body. It's just been, it's just been great. I'm not saying it because you're my guy, but
Well, and you said something, you said most, I'm not always so interested how much force they can put in the ground. These guys can all put a lot of force. I'm really interested in how that foot is being set up and where that foot is when they're about to put force on the ground. And that was the whole drive when you said, I think your product can help with that. And I said 100%. You were like, come on down to Florida.
Yeah, so it has been a really, really good product for us to use it. And it's kind of
Well, I was going to say, have you found, that the value in it in performance? Because there's a lot of things. Last question from my side. There's a lot of things that help you get fit. There's a lot of great products that give you strength. But would you say Exogen is a product that helps you with the performance side you know, when you said these are the things that we focus on when we're trying to win. And, you know, technical.
Well, the thing that you can say, Joe, is that you have, and I'm just speaking at my level, at the professional level. At our level, you have basically 1% or less of the athletes that are sprinters at this level that biomechanically are awesome.
Yeah.
Do almost everything right. Right? The other 99% are still elite athletes. Right? But when you're that 1%, you're what's called a generational talent. You're like, you have every component necessary to be great. Right? You just have it intrinsic. It's just there. Now, the other 99%, that's where coaching comes in. Now, you said, can they carry, you know, the things that they learn with exogen into a competition? Absolutely. Because you're making that 99% of athletes into the 1%. Because the 1% is only the 1%, not because they're stronger, not because they're faster. I mean, they end up being faster, right? Not because they're smarter, but because biomechanically they're sound.
Yeah.
Right? So they can take their speed that is equal to the person next to them, and just because they're doing something extraordinary, like striking the ground properly, right? It makes them better than the person next to them. Well, when you put exogen on the person next to them, you know, it helps us be able to have that conversation with that 99th percentile athlete to be able to control their extremities and learn how to control their extremities and learn how to neuromuscularly be connected with those parts of the body so that they can control them and they can be better at striking the ground or holding the knee longer in a particular stride, or keeping the heel low throughout stride. So it helps them to be able to help develop them into that 1%.
And as we always say at Leela, as you see online, speed is a skill. And the best athletes, like in any sport, are the most skillful.
I think phone on me.
Sorry, Dennis, I was saying speed is a skill, and the best athletes in any sport are always the most skillful. I always say this, you know, if you ask a coach, would you like a 5% improvement in fitness or a 5% improvement in skill? You know where they're going to start. Because skill always changes. Improvements in skill change competition. Fitness could help, you know, going up in a squat might be helpful if that's your primary issue. But, you know, technique is always sort of the end result. I mean, if you look at any sport and you were going to predict and put some money on somebody, the first question I'd ask is not who's the strongest. I'd probably ask who's got the most skill. And so these are the things we want to continue to work on. I think, Dennis, we've gone a good almost half hour over. I'm going to sort of wrap this with you right now. I think I'll leave you to just say, coaches out there with block starts, take home message from you is everything we just talked about.
Really not. We start this whole conversation all over again, Joe.
Yeah.
You know, but the main thing you want to take away from this is, you know, don't be afraid to coach. You know, when there are components that are necessary for you, if you want to be a great start coach, you know, the knowledge is out there. You know, you just have to open your playbook a little bit and be, you know, very creative in terms of how you approach things. If you're how you're looking for, speeds you're looking for, angles you're looking for, you know, train those components into your athletes and take the time to train. You know, don't be afraid that, you know, I create power from November to April. You know, I'm building that power into these athletes. And then from you know, March until June, I'm teaching start mechanics. You know, so be patient with, you know, being able to teach all of these components at different time to ingrain them, you know, into the athlete. And some of them are going to learn fast, and some of them are going to learn slow. And if you have your grasp roots of things that you want to teach, things that you can hold on, then, you know, everybody's going to end up at the same spot at the same time.
Amen. Um, for anybody who's got questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll leave it open. We'll try and answer some of them after. I am going to stay online to do a quick review of the 6-week speed program for weeks 3 and 4, and show a couple of clips of some of the things Dennis had talked about, loading specifically in the blocks. But Dennis, I'm going to let you sign off. I apologize to everybody on the frustration in the last 15 minutes. We'll figure out where that came from, but most importantly, thank you, Dennis, for an amazing chat. And I think if you didn't learn something from that, you were on mute the whole time.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right. Hey, best of luck with Nationals. Big week coming up. Say hi to the team and we'll chat soon, my man.
I will.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. Ciao. Okay, for those of you still listening, I'm just going to open this up. We've got about 5 minutes, as we do at the end of the masterclass, to walk through. I'm going to show you some clips from the track with Dennis, with the athletes we talked about, and where and why we load them in those places. And then if you've got another question, definitely jump in here. Just going to share screen. And can you see screen right now? Yeah. All right. So we'll move past that. I'm going to go fairly quick here. We already had the master class. So this is a bit of loading. So that's TT. You can obviously see her there. Why is that still saying? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. All right. So this is literally one of the block sessions. And if you look closely here, this is what we call neutral loading, anterior and posterior balance loading. If you look close, you'll see a load on the back of the calf, and there's a load right there on the front. This is with an athlete who has sort of correct knee angles, but really wants to work on keeping that leg parallel and forward drive. Very strong push. So they're not kicking up too high. They're not missing the toe drag. They're getting load in there to really work on drive. And like Dennis said, getting that leg moving forward fast. Now this one looks at targeting an athlete who needs to, let me get this video up. This is a video. I'll let you watch the video. This is one of our Paralympic Team USA world champions, Des Jackson. Okay. Now what you see, I'm going to go through that again slowly. Just bear with me here. And you could see a very different loading. Des is loaded on the back of the calf. Specifically, sorry, this is anterior loading. He's loaded here on the front of the calf to help keep his foot down, what's called toe drag. Essentially help him feel that load, that leg stay low. You can look at his angle here as he progresses. Keep that toe low right there. That weight is physically pulling that leg down, so he's aware to not let that heel kick up. And so this is a proprioceptive loading. It's not a load for weight or power. The other places he has load is here at the top of the thigh and at the top of the thigh of the amputee leg as well. So both can drive out equally. Remember what Dennis said about trying to run away from the block? That punch is really important. And so that loading on the front would be used with an athlete who has a lot of kick at the back and needs to feel a low toe drag. Remember what we talked about, the physicality and the mentality of it. Okay, and we will close that link down. Target an athlete who needs to feel that toe drag and reduce that knee lift. If you've ever seen an athlete who's kicked their ankle up at the back, that's where we get away from that. This is an interesting approach. It's the same problem, but it's with an athlete that we wanted not for the weight to pull them down. They almost have an over dominant hamstring. And so we wanted to put the load on the backside of the calf so they feel like the coach's hand is pushing the foot down. This is one of the very fastest people in the world, Kenny Bednarek, and this is his loading, specifically going back to that individualization. Dez is loaded on the front because he felt that is what helped him feel that pull down. Kenny is loaded on the back. And this gets really very specific. One sec, you can see that load right on the, and this is heavy. There's 400 grams. There's 2 there. That's a full pound on the back of his calf. And let's just put that into slow motion a little bit. Let's pause it. So there is 200 grams. The belly's low, what we call a distal load. Another load is on the other side. And again, he's got that load in the front for that knee punch. Again, to run away from the block. Watch when he sets up. Let's just back that up a little bit. Let me pause that. Give you a chance to see that in slow motion. Now look at those angles. You know, the very best in the world do it well, the very best. Nice parallel. That load is pushing that foot, holding that foot down, because what we don't want that foot to do is kick up. So we're trying to remove that kick up. Put the coach's hand here, put the load here, put the load at the front of the thigh so that angle trajectory is nice and low. And look how far forward he is. You can feel he's doing everything right. And I'll just press play and you'll watch it shoot. Up. That's what the very best in the world look like and the loading they do to achieve it. Let me close that one down. And we're going to show you one more. So different loading for different scenarios. This is another one of the very best in the world. Aaron Brown, multiple Olympic gold medalist, Team Canadian anchor. And now we have posterior loading on the knee. What we're looking for here is that knee to snap back out of the block. So when somebody's not getting that extension, that push forward, that running away from the blocks, we use this with him. And I'll let you see it here. So what you're seeing also is when I'm down on the track with Dennis or with any team or program, we do a lot of very specific coaching. Boom. Let's watch that again. He's loaded right there behind the knee. Boom. So he feels the extension and that extension and drive away. This is German bobsledding, the world champions. They're doing something very similar in their starts with the sled, loading at the back of the knee. These are NFL linemen doing another similar pattern, loading above and below the knee. So they really feel that push down into the ground. Just showing you some alternate people in other sports that are using something similar that we learned from track, and them feeling push, That guy there has a 4.340, that one you just saw. So I'll just show you that on Aaron one more time. Loaded there. Back of the knees. You notice nothing on his calf. And then putting it all together, this is what Dennis was talking about. Okay, Dennis talked about group starts. At Star Athletics, they do these nonstop. This is one of those sessions. It's kind of a privilege to get in, to dive in and see some of it. Listen to what he said there. It's not about how fast you are, but where you're going. And they're all loaded specifically with something to help them with that pattern. Loading in the front to keep those legs low. Push straight. And we're loaded to help them do that. And look how far out that start went. And so what you saw there was a bunch of loading profiles we used with the start. Really, at that level, we're also loading for each athlete. But in general, we load that front of the leg. We really want people to feel that low position. And the other thing too is he loads them when they're practicing real starts. You notice that you also saw them run those starts all the way out. They didn't just go 5 or 10 meters. Remember what he was talking about? Sometimes we'll run those starts out to 50. They'll do 10, they'll do 30, they'll do 50. And it just gives you an opportunity to see a little bit more of how that loading works and what they're doing, the individualization around it. So I'm going to time out on there. Thank you for if you've stayed in. Oh, one last thing I'll share with you in a minute. But if you have any questions, jump in. Like I said, I do a lot of this with different athletes, whether it's UK, Jamaica, USA, NBA. If you've got questions around what you saw, ask away. Or if you have any general questions, stay here for a minute or two. And hopefully the session was informative. One last thing I'll show you on progressions. Let me just show you the end of the okay, let's close that down. And the last thing to show you here from the speed program. This is weeks 2 and 3. For those of you who received the speed program, you talk about loading progressions. Now you see in weeks 2, you're still doing your warm-ups. In weeks 2 and 3, now you're actually putting Exogen into your warm-ups and your starts. So you're going from 20 minutes of loading to 40 minutes of loading a session. You're at week 3, you're adding multiple panels, more weight, whether it's your top, whatever that product is. But most important, you're doubling up your workload. Okay, and you should be confident at this point to be able to add Exogen in to these specific areas. Just like, and this is no different than what we do with Shikari or Kenny or Christian McCaffrey. You know, they're all following very similar patterns because regardless your level, speed issues are more or less the same issues. The difference is how fast you're doing them. So we're going to wrap on that. First, I apologize for the technical difficulty. I have no idea why Dennis and I had a little issue there, but just so you know, wait, what's the code? MC2, just that's it. We've got for the next 48 hours, we have a 20% off Exogen, which includes free shipping, which is like another 20%. Use the code. This is a little bonus, MC20. Correct, Amir? MC22. MC2. Amir, just look at MC2. You go to the website, use MC2 over the next 48 hours, you'll get Exogen for 20% off plus free shipping on top of what other bonuses are there. It's a little special thank you. The kit we recommend for sprinting is shorts and calves. That's the stuff that you see. Tops are great if you're working, max velocity, but definitely get some kit to start and reach out as always. My email, I'll put it in there at lilateam.com. That's my personal email. You can send me a message at any time, and I'm happy to consult, work with you. And thank you, everybody, for joining in. Remember, in 2 weeks, we're taking this to another level. We're bringing in one of the NFL's top 40-meter specialists, 40-yard specialists. And we are going to be, we'll make that available for the calf sleeves as well. We'll get that to do that as well. Troy Jones, we're going to be talking about that 40. And when you've got a group of athletes who are team sport guys who don't do a lot of sprinting, how do we get them fast in 6 weeks in preparation for the beginning of the year or a college combine? Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.